Two, one. Welcome everybody back to the Expression of Love podcast. It is your host, Soul Expression, and I am here with my new esteemed guest, brother that I've known for since 2010, so over 10 years. Really good brother, strong man. You know what I'm saying? Just if you could put strong man into a body, it'd be that guy. His name is Denzel. What's happening, Denzel? How you doing today?
Hey, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. Just clean the house and everything. So I'm feeling refreshed, recharged, and everything. I'm good. Just trying to stay cool in this heat. How you living?
Absolutely, yeah, man. I'm good too. I'm in Texas, so it's
Okay.
always hot. You know, only time it's not hot, it's like January and February. It's not hot. Other
Yeah.
than that, it's hot. Um, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it is. I mean,
No, but the son does live in Texas.
absolutely, yeah.
Right up.
Um, it's good to have you on, man. It's exciting to reconnect with you. Um, I wanted you to come on the show, not just because I saw you, in the clip from the other
Hmm.
show that you was on, but because just since I've known you in some of the I guess the community advocacy and the fights that you're involved in, right? The political
Hmm.
fights that you give your voice to and that you inspire through. Was something that I felt needed to be on the show. It's called the Expression of Love podcast,
Hmm.
and that is what we're going to explore today. But expressions of love don't always have to be romantic and
Right.
dealing with just romantic relationships. They can also be expressions of love for your people, love for blackness, love for God, love for righteousness and justice. All of that is also included in expressions of love, and that's why I wanted to bring you on. Also, don't shy away from, if they come to mind, don't shy away from kind of touching on the real time issues, because man, shit is
Yeah.
popping off right
Yeah.
now, huh?
For sure.
It is
For sure.
popping. The whole country, just to left and right, it is popping off right now. What a time to be alive, eh?
Hmm. That's a fact. That's a fact. We can get into that for sure.
Absolutely. So firstly, for the listening audience, please introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And how does what you do bring people together to be able to express love more freely?
For sure, yeah. So, for those who don't know, my name is Denzel Caldwell. Born, raised, currently organizing in Nashville, Tennessee. I am a community organizer with several local organizations. One of which is called the Black Nashville Assembly. The goal of which is to get Black folks in Nashville to figure out together how to build a self-determined future for us in the city. But we do it through this thing called the People's Movement Assembly. We get community members to come together to talk about the shared problems, to synthesize like how we understand it, and then to come up with community-based solutions to address those problems. And so I'm a part of that. I'm also a part of the Nashville Economic Justice Alliance, whose purpose is to get a guaranteed basic income in the city of Nashville and eventually the state of Tennessee. We're coordinated with a lot of other national or localized guaranteed income fights that are across the country. And so we're just doing work in the city of Nashville. Beyond that, I'm also the Sergeant of Arms for the Middle Tennessee Black Gun Club. And we can get into that. That's like a relatively new venture. And
Sounds fun.
yeah, for sure, for sure. We could definitely talk about that. And then lastly, I'm also a martial arts instructor. I've been doing that for a very long time, so I can tell you. And so, like, that's what I do. Started at the age of 9, and was consistent at age 14 moving forward. I'm about to be 30 this year. And so I've been doing different systems, various styles of Kung Fu. My first system was a family system called Black Lotus Kung Fu. Did a Wing Chun, Capoeira, Angola style, currently training in 52 blocks. Shout out to 52 blocks ATL. And yeah, just that's my passion. That's something I want to offer to community. And I say all that as an introduction because that is those practices, those things I commit myself to are an expression of love from my community. When I say my community, I'm not just talking about Black folks in Nashville. I'm talking about like the diaspora, because I'm very international in my focus. And so like what I think about and what I study, whether it be local or international or in the past or the present, it's for love for my people. And so that's how I move. That's who I am.
Awesome, awesome. And I met you down in Atlanta at Morehouse College. That's
Yes,
where we
sir.
met. We became friends. We used to play Tekken together and talk trash and all of that. That was real fun. And
Yeah.
and seeing how you've taken on adulthood, and taken on responsibility for using your gifts and talents, has been amazing. Watching you, and I admire you for the things that you
Hmm.
do. One of the things that you mentioned, when you were talking about the first organization, excuse me for
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
name,
it's okay.
that was a lot. You know what I'm saying? I try to
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
it
it
moving.
was. It was Black Nashville Assembly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Um, is community-based solutions.
Hmm.
Now, a lot of our thank you. He put it in the chat, y'all. He put it in the chat. Very professional. Very professional. Um, but community-based solutions. When people hear that, sometimes they're not going to know what that mean. What how they're not going to they're going to know what it means in terms of the words, but they're not
Right.
going to know how that actually helps. And sometimes a lack of education will lead to people even shying away from things that sound like that, right? We'll hear
Mm-hmm.
at certain stages of our lives, we'll hear stuff like community based solutions and be like, oh, it sounds like a bunch of people just talking. But
Mm-hmm.
if and I know this because I've been a part of organizations and I even started my own committee back in the day. It's no longer a thing, but which was boots on the ground. And so, what does community based solutions lead to in your eyes? And if you've seen any positive results or changes, let's give that some light.
Yeah, for sure. So when I speak about community-based solutions, yeah, I'm speaking from a particular um politic tradition. A lot of folks talk about the Black radical tradition, but sometimes folks can't get any more specific than that. So for me, and I can be very upfront about this, I'm a Pan-African socialist. What does that mean? That means that I believe in the freedom of Black folks, both here and across the planet, from the systems of white supremacy, from capitalism, patriarchy, all of these things. And being a Pan-African socialist in part means I want to live in a world where our priorities, our lives are prioritized over profit and over being treated like a product, essentially. And so I say that to ground my answer, because part of what we do through the Black Nashville Assembly is utilize this thing called the People's Movement Assembly. In short, that whole concept came from this international organization called the World Social Forum in Brazil back in the early 2000s. And their whole purpose was trying to tear down these systems across the planet too. And they used this process where they were like, hey, let's make decisions instead of just having one or a group of people, a small group of people make decisions for everybody. Let's all figure out a way to where we can all contribute to a collective solution together. And so what happened was, from the early 2000s, moving into about 2003 or so, this is when you start to see it show up in the U.S., right? Through El Paso, Texas. You saw a lot of folks, undocumented folks, coming together and using that approach to making decisions to to change their conditions in the area. Fast forward, one of the more well known ones is the Jackson Assembly. The People's Movement Assembly in Jackson. That's a 30-year project. You had brothers and sisters move down to Mississippi from places like Detroit, and they planted themselves in the community and were like, "Yo, we're about to build a process, like a grassroots process, where everybody come to the table and say, what are the problems that we have? What do and then the second phase is who's in power that can actually impact those things that are our problems, right? What can we do in order to build the solutions. What solution do we want to see? And the last thing is, how can we make those happen, right? They've done a lot of really dope stuff in Jackson. One of the major things, at least in the electoral arena, they actually elected the current mayor. They got the current mayor into office as a result of the assembly process. So, and I know I do want to make a note that too often people, when they talk about community empowerment and change, it's always in the context of electoral politics or voting. When I talk about this process, like, it's way beyond that. It goes way beyond that. For me, that's not the center for me. That's
Yeah.
a piece that can be
Right.
used, here and there.
Useful.
But
It's
yeah,
useful.
exactly. It's about the people,
Right.
right? So when we talk about like people's movement assemblies, especially like here in Nashville and stuff like that, you can use that for so many things. Like, for example, we got a sneaker drive that we're coming up with,
Okay.
where we're getting a lot of people to pitch in, because us the kids need sneakers here. We all said, cool. We all said we wanted to do that, make sure our kids were covered. Boom, that happened. That was us who determined that, not anybody else. We're educating ourselves. So like whenever we had election come up recently, just using the electoral example, where you had so many Black folks that came to the assembly that the politicians came there and were like, yo, like every single one of them for the judicial elections, like, hey, what we did was, instead of letting them come and talk about what they gonna do, we said, no, when you come in this space, our people get to ask questions about what you gonna do for them, right? And so like that was the whole thing, and we actually have the recording of that. And so like a lot of what we were doing in this process, and again, this is just one piece,
Yeah.
right? Our people got to determine what they wanted to see, and they turned it into a whole like political agenda. And they're like, yo, this is what we want to see happen. All that other stuff y'all giving us, if it don't align with this,
Right. And
no.
and this is not just for us, but it's for us, from us, through us.
Exactly.
And that makes a lot of sense. The beautiful thing about what you just kind of, the picture you just kind of painted here, is that we can start to combat this misconception about leadership and political leadership, because the
Mm-hmm.
biggest misconception about leadership that I've run into on my own journey is people think a leader tells people what to do, but that's not true. What
Right.
really happens, or at least not a good leader. Yeah, bad leaders, they tell people what to do, but a good leader, what really happens is they tell people where to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
They tell what they say, you're on this team and you're on this team, and you guys over here on this team, y'all come up with the thing. I'm not coming up with the thing. I'm leading us into the right direction. So I tell you where to go, but you tell me what to do. You tell the surrounding communities what to do. And so this misconception of leadership that comes with the territory of, we have this president that's supposed to be over this whole 300 million, 400 million people, and all of this technology, and they can just make decisions like for everybody's lives. And growing up in that environment, it fosters this belief that, okay, a leader is somebody who tells me what to do, or who tells somebody what to do, and if I'm a leader, then I need to tell people what to do. And that's a big misconception. What are some things that you have either been a part of, or you've been thinking about, that can bring more understanding to combat that misconception of leadership, and where we can do more of what you just said, where we come and we say, hey, leader, you're driving the direction, but these are the things that we need as your
Mm-hmm.
labor force, as your marketing, as your everything. This is what we need, and we can't budge in the direction that you point us until these things are met. Like, what are some ways that we can combat that? Sorry if that's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question though. Like, so I think part of what you were getting at really gets to the root of my answer, right? Because you were talking about how a good leader essentially knows how to bring out the strengths of the people that are in the group. I've heard someone talk about this idea, this idea of leading from the middle. And this idea of like where you're in the midst of doing the work that you're doing as an individual or as a group of people based on your strengths, but you also are making sure that you're developing leaders amongst your people, right? So like using the framework of like Black Nashville Assembly as well as the other orgs that I'm a part of, like our approach is really it's a cyclical form of leadership, or just like this because like you said, we're used to this top down thing where it's like someone up here, a group of people up here, and the rest down here. But this is circular in the sense that I come in, I recognize that I'm a part of a whole. I have a role that I could feel based on my strengths, right? But I also recognize that I'm one being and my capacity is limited. So part of what I do is when we come into this space, it's grounded in, okay, what are your strengths? How can we make you stronger? And how can we prepare you for leadership in a moment where we might need to lean on you versus someone else, right? Because in different moments, it requires different forms of leadership and different people and to fulfill this task.
That's
And
deep.
so what happens is it's more or less an ebb and flow, right? And so like, yeah, like, you know, you got some folks here, like just like in our organization that, you know, maybe a part of what's considered the strategy team or the flight crew, right? But the reality is we got different teams. You got the political education team, you got the arts and culture team, you got the communication and events team, you got security, all these different things. And they're not like these things where it's like, okay, we do these things and that's it. Like people are actually sharing their knowledge with each other. So if let's say I'm in the political education team, I'm learning about security. I'm learning about arts and culture. That may not be my primary task, but I'm learning about it in a way to where I can see the bigger collective picture that's being created. And it's not just this sort of thing where it's like, I got to go to this one person to learn this thing who's the only source and then, you know, work my way up the ladder. There is no ladder. It's a cycle and you can go in and out however you need to. Okay, I may not be able to hold this role. Somebody else got it. I'm gonna be here and do my thing until I, you know, unless I need to go to another place. You know what I mean? So I think I summarize all that to say that to me, like great leadership is one that not only like recognizes its strengths and limits, but it commits to developing leadership and strength within the people that that person or group is leading.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Thank you for offering that. That's yeah, that's. I mean, it's almost like, you know, when we get two minds like yours and mine in the same room, it's like, okay, so let's fix the world. You know, let's do this thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's move on a little bit here, and I want to bring this next one in the right way.
Okay.
So we're on the Expression of Love podcast, and we've introduced, you know, already some good nuggets to keep in mind about how organizing can and will be the catalyst for a new age. Right. And not and you know, we fight for black people, but the benefit of black people is the benefit of the world. It's not just right. It's nobody's. Anyway, I want to bring this next one in.
Right. You're right. Yeah, I know exactly where you're going. You're right.
You know that? Yeah. Okay. So, but I don't want to get lost. You're gonna have to protect the organizations that start to actually bring about change in a major way. Absolutely. Because change in a major way, you can't have it without hurting the pockets of the established oligarchies and we'll say powers that be, although I don't usually like to use cliches like that.
Yeah.
But
I'm with
you. We cannot escape. We cannot pretend like we can just make change and then they stay happy.
Right.
They don't retaliate, and they don't go into shadow government mode and start making moves on the chessboard. So you mentioned, that you have trained your own self in self-defense hand to hand, as well as self-defense with um, the art of gunmanship. Is that swordsmanship?
I so appreciate the way you frame that, because a lot of people do not understand that that's a martial art too. But I of
Art.
course you would be the first one to recognize that.
It's an
Yeah,
art, man. And thank you
yeah,
for the compliment, but no, it's
yeah,
it's an art. I've owned one. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? And I'm not a bad shot myself. I can't do it while running though. So if I'm
Hey,
running,
I'm
I'm
still
probably
working.
a
Hey, look,
horrible shot.
that's
But
that's not easy.
because
It's not
you
easy.
see some of these trainers and they could be almost full speed, like
Yep.
sprint, and they will hit like right in the middle. It's crazy. Anyway, my jealousy aside, we're going to have to protect
hmm
um, not only just the people in the organizations, but after a while, we're going to have to protect the buildings.
Yep.
We're going to have to protect the ideologies from being misspread
hmm
in a country and in a world where two news reports can change the populace's opinion,
Absolutely.
um, which is a whole nother can of worms. Because then, what really is the populace opinion if that can happen? But
That's a
nonetheless,
whole
we do live
episode by
here.
itself. hmm
Right, we do live here, and so with learning self defense in all shapes and forms that work for the individual, how do we go about organizing
hmm
protection of our plans that again will come in contact with the bad guys' money? I'll just say that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. There's two ways I want to approach this. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that in order for us to holistically answer that question that you had, because part of the answer is in what and how you asked it, it's we have to expand our definition of self-defense, right? Or community defense, I would say. Um, and I say that because, as you probably have seen with other folks, when people hear community or self-defense, they automatically go to that image of the Panthers with the rifle or the shotgun, you know what I mean? Or folks knowing how to get down, doing martial arts, and being able to combat a threat, right? Or physical threat, I should say. And that's important. I mean, that's important. That's not even
Right.
like
Not
dancing around it.
downplay that part.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely critical. But the parts that people overlook when they get overly obsessed with that part are some of the more invisible things that you just mentioned, right? So okay, you know how to shoot, you know how to fight. Okay, but have you studied Black liberation movements? Have you studied like the ideologies and the ways in which they have evolved and helped some of these movements in the past and the present, so that when you hear nonsense coming from the news channels or from, let's call us them the enemies, right? That you know the difference, right? Um, when I think about you to your point, you brought up a great point about the news. Like, have you studied your enemy, right? Have you studied because I think one of the things that in this era, especially with rapid information and the shaping of public opinions, the
And no
problem with that
attention span.
exactly with no attention span, the problem is, yeah, exactly. Twofold. One, people have a short attention span, so they don't want to focus on something for a long time, and that's socially manufactured itself. But then also, too, like when you're absorbing all this information uncritically, then your idea of who's the enemy and what's liberation and what's bad and things like that gets shaped. Like you're not actively shaping it, right? And so like part of that too is also understanding the psychological and technological aspects of this. Like, how is social media weaponized against movements today? How is it that how is history being reshaped before our very eyes through media, through conversations that people have that don't, and where they don't criticize their assumptions? Outside of that, when we get back to the physical, like, you know, self-defense is also is about the preservation of life. How are you doing things such as gardening, such as medical, such as communication, all of these other things? Are you developing those skills to maintain the promotion of life, right? And I think lastly and most importantly, like, are you very clear about the world that you're trying to build? Because I think what happens is, again, we can talk about in so many ways how this structure currently is, but I think where a lot of us lose, not even just in the physical sense, but in the psychological sense, and in some ways spiritual sense, is we don't take time to think about the world that we want to build and we want to move towards, right? We're so busy being in opposition, and we say destroy, which is necessary, right? But if we don't think about building, then what happens is we just absorb the thing that already is. So it's just like part of self-defense too is also, okay, what is the world that I'm trying to create? Are people still treated like products in this world? Are women still abused, right? Or are they protected? Are they free to be who they are? Are people persecuted for their identities? Or are people affirmed in who they are with uncritically, without any like sort of preconceived notions of who is the other and who's not, right? Are we living in a world where we're about to face a climate catastrophe because of the way we've abused the earth? Or are we building technology and building communities and safe areas that are working in harmony with the earth, where the earth feeds us and we feed the earth, right?
Right.
So if we don't have those, and we're not doing that imaginative work, then all the other stuff, self-defense, organizing, community building, all that stuff, it's not going to be based on anything. It's not going to have a
Right.
foundation.
And
So
it's a really
yeah.
beautiful point that you made about, are people demonized for their identity or your projected identity of them, or
Mm-hmm.
is it a world where people are affirmed for who they are and what their potential is, and the potential that they have within the greater whole or the greater
Absolutely.
community? Because one of the key elements of community,
Mm-hmm.
right, outside of household, which is a different thing, is division of labor.
Mm-hmm.
And division of labor, why does everybody on the block have a lawnmower in the suburbs? Why does everybody in the suburbs have a lawnmower right next to each other? Everybody got a lawn, and everybody got kids, multiple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
why is that? Because there's no division of labor. Why are there, in certain more affluent places, why do all of the doctors live kind of around the same spot?
Mm-hmm.
Why? It's because we're taught that, first of all, you have to go to the hospital. Second of all, you have to, and that ignorance, that ignorance of the division of labor that's necessary for a thriving community, not surviving, but a thriving community, is what leads to our unconscious dependence on a governing body to create our lives for us and
Mm-hmm.
create our opinions for us and create our assumptions for us and ultimately create our prejudice for us.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that just, well, that got deeper than I thought it would. But this
Yeah, for
division of
sure.
labor thing is so ignored, and it just goes over
And
people's
and I,
heads. Yeah.
and I'm glad you named that too, because it's important to name those systems of capitalism. Like, it just straight up, like, it's just you where we value people over profit, and or value profit over
Profit over
people.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, and it works in such a way to where it's like, using your example, it's more important for large corporations to sell each and every house a lawnmower, right? Rather than community saying, hey, do a couple of y'all have a solid working lawnmower? Okay, let's all share that, because there's literally no need for this thing that I would be wasting money on to sit in the shed for a couple of weeks, and while we use it sometimes, when less gas can be put in the air. People can build community together and coordinate with each other, get to know each other. All of that is being destroyed by this whole idea of I'm just in my house with this honestly European idea of what's called the nuclear family, and that's it. And there's others over there, instead of saying that we're all a collective unit, right? And we all have children and we all have partners, you know what I mean? And saying, hey, let's share our resources because we are one. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely. And then there's community garden projects that can be started, and um, there's hella grandmas that can cook soup for 25 people in one pot,
absolutely.
and people can be fed, and people don't, we tell ourselves that we're too busy trying to make money because we don't know how to share. If we knew
Exactly.
how to share, there'd be at least a little less stress and a little less worry about the
Mm-hmm.
next meal, the next clothing. People make clothes on your block. There
Yep.
are there are designers and people that just love putting together fabric on your block, right? And brilliant minds. There are inventors. There are mechanics. Or future mechanics maybe, on your block right now, right? 16, 17 years old with nothing to do in the afternoon but hang out with their friends. Now you got to let kids be kids, but the point
Right.
is community, right? So the teaching and learning together, and something that you said that goes on in a couple of your organizations is the dissemination of information, or um, the putting out of smarts, the sharing of info, which again, if it's done in your community, if everybody on the block knows how to grow tomatoes and one person is doing it, then when they are not able to be home, then we can be like, hey, can you come tend to these things? We're not going to be here for 3 weeks. I just need you to, keep them watered or whatever, and I'll give you some money to do that. Versus losing your crops, right? And oops, oh well, next year. Like no, like there's so much love that can be created when we build real communities. And if I ever start a politically charged um like movement again myself, it will be around building real community with division of labor, regardless. And I'm a blackety black man, but I mean
Mm-hmm.
regardless of race, background, to an extent, and right within reason. So
Right. 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 Right.
regardless of
For sure.
background, regardless of political affiliation,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of gang affiliation,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of anything that doesn't fit. Now, that doesn't mean you leave all your doors open, all your windows open,
Right.
only
Right. Right.
more than
Right.
any neighborhood.
For
But
sure.
if everybody know what's up, then it's like people are so afraid to even take one step that they don't
Right.
think it through, right? We say, well, if I take a step in that direction, then that leaves me vulnerable. It's like, no, think it through. If we all take a step in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
or most of us take a step in that direction, if half of us take a fucking step in that direction, right? Then no, what do we have to gain? Not what do we have to lose.
Right. And I think
You know
you
what
know
I'm
what, and this is why I'm an advocate of things like practices like restorative justice or transformative justice, right? Because like to your point, like what's driving people's fear there is the fear of harm, right?
saying? Yes.
So what if
Or
what
loss.
or loss? So what happens if we name the thing and say, hey, let's create a way as we take this step to collectively work through problems, right? Because for me, it's like start from the ground up. Let's figure out how we can address something that goes down in our space as we create this new world. If we can agree to address a issue from a holistic lens, like what are the conditions that made this thing happen? Because it's not just about the thing that happened. So someone loses someone else, or someone loses a thing, harm was done to somebody. It's also about the conditions that create that harm, right? Because nothing happens in a vacuum. So what do we say if we say, okay, all right, we know that folks are going to get in conflict. We know that People are going to have disagreements. We know that, catastrophes are going to happen. How do we navigate those things? If we can address those collectively, particularly in a way that keeps into account how things happen and how we can change the conditions so that we can limit the possibility of it happening again, I think it makes it that much easier and necessary, honestly, to take that step as you're mentioning for like something more collective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a big silent enemy is not the teachers, but the schooling
Yeah,
of our
absolutely,
children.
absolutely.
Um, I actually, in terms of what it was, what I'll say, in my opinion, it was supposed to be, I
Mm-hmm.
like public school, the
Mm-hmm.
idea of it, but I hate public school. I hate public
In
charter
practice,
and a lot of private schools,
yeah.
the how it turned out.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I don't mean just the surface level of, in Texas, they took the slavery word out and stuff. Yeah, that's bullshit too. But
But before that,
before that and more fundamentally,
mm-hmm.
the, and I already talked about this too in like two other episodes, but it's so important. The fact that on tests, there's one right answer and a bunch of wrong answers. And so you
Mm-hmm.
develop this ideology and thinking that if that there's a right way to be yourself and there's a right way to, and there's a bunch of wrong, one right way is the
Right.
point, and there's everything else is basically wrong. That happens because year after year for 12 or 14, 16 years in a row, there's only one right answer for the thing that matters most, which is your school career, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is, for most things outside of like science projects, there's no collaboration, there's no cooperation. You have to do it yourself. You have to think it yourself. I'm only calling on one person. You must raise your hand, you know what I'm saying? And I'm going to call on you, and you have to get it right. And if you don't get it right, then you're not as smart as George or Sally or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that those, and there's more, but those fundamental lessons, right? And then there's more surface level stuff too. That's, we don't learn about taxes till grad school. We don't learn, about community and gardening and nutrition and things until after sometimes grad school, till you just out here with the disease and now you have to research it. Like basically until you're in your practice, if you are a nutritionist,
Mm-hmm.
or like I said, when you have a disease or your daddy gets a stroke or something like that. And there's more surface level problems as well with schooling and how it turned out. But these how smart are you state tests are garbage,
Garbage. Yep.
except for understanding how to use the English language. They're garbage. That's pretty much, and math. They're garbage. Outside of those two things, because learning how to really utilize the English language is definitely useful. Mathematics is definitely useful to an extent. Now, algebra two and
Mm-hmm.
up, I don't know. Algebra two and up, everything before algebra two is yeah, you gotta. But algebra two and up, I don't know. I mean, it's not. It's like, okay, if you like it, then make it an elective. I don't know. I don't want to get too deep
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to start talking bullshit. But basically, there's a lot of fluff and a lot of, let me just see how smart you are, which is really
Mm-hmm.
not even measuring your smarts. It's measuring your memorization. That's because
Exactly.
smarts and memorization are not the same thing at all.
Exactly.
But they're adjacent, and so they can trick you into believing they're the same thing.
Exactly.
But yeah. So there's a lot of I think the problem that you laid out starts in the school, and I went off
Yeah.
on a little bit of a tangent there, but
No, you're good because
I'd like
I
to hear what
think
you're saying.
yeah I'd like to I'd like to add to it because for me it's all about getting to the root, right? This we're in the U.S. The U.S. was born in violence. It was born in the genocide of indigenous folks here. It was born in the kidnapping and exploitation of Africans. It was born in this violent carving out the of this empire, right? And its tentacles are spread throughout the planet. 1,000 military stations across the planet. And the thing, I start there because empires have to maintain control, right, in order to survive. So what does that say about our schools, right? That says, hey, the way that we teach you, we want to teach you how you should think in order to maintain this empire, which means that, okay, if this empire was built on death dealing and death and genocide, right? So the teachings, the underpinnings of what we learn are going to be death dealing. They're going to be, hey, you're going to work till you die. You're going to think how you're supposed to be thinking until you die, right? And to your point about, okay, we're not learning about these things like taxes or nutrition. Well, part of that is, if we look at schools as a form of or an exertion of power by the empire, yeah, the things that you're not supposed to know about or they're not teaching you most likely are the things that are gonna give you the ability to exert your power
Make
against
you
the
less
empire.
reliant on them. Yeah.
Absolutely, because then you'll ask more critical questions like, why are we even doing this? Why is it structured the way that it is, which will lead you to some very revolutionary conclusions. So yeah, like I totally agree with you. Like it's there's so many aspects of it that are designed to exploit. I mean, even down to, like you said, like everything's hyper individualized. What can this one person do versus what can you do collectively? And it's all standardized. It's like, instead of looking at each student and thinking about the way that they learn, their strengths, and developing those, it's like, no, you all learn this one thing, and if you fail, fine. If not, oh well.
Right.
So
Measuring the intelligence of the fish by its ability to climb a tree.
mhm.
Um, yeah, man. Thank you for that. Let's see, what else do I got here in my mental Rolodex? Mr. Denzel.
We can drop bars all day.
Yo, I mean, we going there today, huh?
Yeah,
We going there today.
for sure.
What are some pitfalls that we can avoid when building our organizations and eventually having our organizations that are established cooperate with each other across state lines, you know what I'm saying, even internationally? I know that my mom is doing a lot of work out in Africa right now. Stuff like that is going on. So like, what are some pitfalls that you've seen, because you're way more of a community in terms of organizer than I am. What are some pitfalls we can avoid in this journey to bring about a way better new generation, um, and just nation for ourselves to even enjoy?
Yeah, so I would say there's several things that are screaming at me right now. One, in this age of going viral and hype and social media, first thing I would say is to combat individualism. Like this whole idea that to your point about leadership, combating this idea that one person or even a small group of people are going to save everybody, because that is part of how the empire maintains its power. It gives you this false idea that one person did this thing. Even how we talk about history, it's that great man, great woman, great person approach to history. It's like this one person did all these things. Well, no, they had people around them. They played a role, but they didn't play all the roles, right? So I think part of first thing I would say that stands out is to make sure that you're not engaging in like that type of individual. What can that look like? Thinking that, okay, without you, thing dies. Well, first off, if that's actually the case, then you didn't create a community organization, you created a cult. So, like, part of what you need to do is think about the ways that you can develop people's leadership, as we mentioned earlier, in a way to where you want to create it to where when you're not there, even if it, even not even when you die, but like
They
if
still know the direction.
yeah, if you go in another direction, it should still be able to function. So I would say
Right.
that things like that, thinking that things like thinking everything ultimately ends with you. Like it should be a collective democratic process on a grassroots level, as far as like decision making. That those are examples of individualism. I would say The other thing is be very clear about what you're trying to achieve, like your vision. For if we're talking about liberation organizations and grassroots organizations, what's your vision of liberation? What is your politic? Like what is it? Like, because one thing that I have noticed is when you have people that are just like, yeah, I'm for black folks, cool. And it's just like, but you can't talk about where you are politically, like, and you can't say, okay, like I'm a part of this tradition, or these are my inspirations, and this is why, this is and this is why we study these people, this is my approach to liberation, this is what it looks like. Then you subject to being controlled by anybody's agenda, especially the empire.
Spell that out a little bit. Spell that out when and I'll tell you what I mean before I let you loose.
Okay.
Because I know what you mean, but I want
Yeah.
to. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you basically, I'm gonna spit back at what you said in the way that I want to lead to what you mean.
Okay.
Basically, when you have an idea that you want to approach bringing great positive change to the nation or the black nation, black aspect of the nation or something, right? You want to bring great positive change to something, and you're just making it up on the fly. Then basically, you're subject to being manipulated by the psychopaths and the narcissists that kind of already hold all the money that you're going to need to fund your shit.
Yeah.
So so can you spell out how people can become so easily manipulated if their heart's in the right place, but they're just winging it? How do they become manipulated? It sounds elementary, but I know you probably have some
Yeah.
good insights.
I'm glad you guys said that. So it kind of goes back to my first point is thinking that it's just about you changing a structure. This empire was built collectively. So in order to build something new and to take it down, it's going to be a collective effort, which means that for me and for folks that I organize with and folks like yourself, we understand that we need organization. We need community. You can't just jump out, and this is one of the problems of the current moment. You can't just jump out as this singular person thinking you're going to change structures. You know what I mean? Like, those are invisible forces that beyond one person. So you're going to need organizations. You're going to need structures to combat structures. And so like that's part of it. I think the other part, and arguably the more important part, is your political education, right? So you can't just come out here and be like, oh, I'm going to change. You need to understand the forces and the ideologies that dictate how things currently are. Understanding when we say white supremacy, what that means. Understand when we say capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, when we say all those things, understanding and studying what that means, where that comes from, right? And then not only just understanding it on an idea level, but also understanding how it shows up in everyday life.
And
Like,
how
why
it
is it?
impacted you so far.
Exactly. Like why, how it shapes where you live, how it shapes the money you buy, the food you eat, the way that you identify
I
yourself,
wish I could buy money.
right. The
The money
language,
that you had, yeah, the money that you
the
got.
money that
Right.
you have, the
Yeah.
language that you speak, you know what I mean? Like the fact that we are African descended people speaking English right now, you know what I mean? Like understanding those things down to that level. And then, as the second part of that is, again, understanding the world that you are trying to create. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I think, and that's not something, again, going to the first point, you can do alone. Like I can read all these books that I got right here and stuff like that, but that ain't gonna mean shit if I ain't in the community, if I'm not a part of an organization that has a particular liberatory, revolutionary politic, you know what I mean, that's practicing that shit, you know. So yeah, that's what it comes down to. That's what I mean
Yeah.
when I say that. And I'm glad you
No, yeah,
did
we
clarify.
yeah, I'm glad you was able to break it down how you did, because yeah, it's like we can develop, a very visceral reaction to concepts like patriarchy, capitalism, this and that. But first of all, like, capitalism is not avoidable. It's not that the ancient cultures that became huge kingdoms didn't have some sort of capital systems that,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying, it's just that the way that it's done here, and some of the policy that is implemented here is a little off. You know what I'm saying? But
I mean, in other structures, and
Marxism
other,
is still capital. Like they're
yeah,
all
it's
capital
all,
based.
yeah, it's all, and I would say to that, I would say that, capitalism as we understand it is only what 500 years old. Like there's so many systems that precede it and
As
will
we know it today, it's only
yeah,
that long. Right.
as we know it today, and
Right.
will succeed it, right? Like, there's so many other, and especially if we're serious about what we're talking about as far as like creating systems where people can be communal and stuff like that, like you're gonna have to think of, we're gonna have to collectively build other systems. Like, yeah, I think to your point too, to kind of like add some even more context, we always are gonna have resources. We're always gonna have the means to live our lives, to exist on planet Earth and to be in community. But like you said, the way in which those are distributed and who has the power over them is what makes the difference between like these different systems and how they play out. Like, is it a system where we say, hey, a small group of people have control over a large amount of resources and they make them a product for everybody to buy? Or is it a thing where it's like a system where everybody has control over these resources that we need to survive, and our system is both focused on building people's strengths individually for the larger collective? Those are two different systems, and it's like, and there are many other types of systems too, but like, getting down to that is where we can get real clear on what we need to shift.
Yeah, it's like designing from the outcome, not trying to force our way to the outcome. It's designing from the outcome instead. Yeah, I like that. I like that. I think a lot of progress could and should be made with that in mind, that we can be very clear on what the vision of the destination is, looks like, smells like, feels like, sounds like, and what would need to be there in terms of policy and politic, in the that's there long term, and that would just have to be there at some point, and then working backwards from there. Okay, so in order to get to where, um, let's say medicinal technology is doing this for people, and we can just set that in motion to where people are taken care of. It's not just a money struggle, because
Right.
I really, it really eats at me, and I feel like there's absolutely no love in the conversation when you're talking to somebody that the first thing they have to say about every cultural innovation is, well, who's gonna pay for it?
I
It's
hate
like
that question.
it's like wait a minute. Do you think that the great inventors of the past would have
Mhm.
stopped inventing if you said, I'm going to provide you with a house, food, and and positive social setting, but I'm not going to give you paper money? You think they would have stopped inventing because they don't get to say, whatever. I don't know.
And I would
I
shift
can't
that.
take I can't take a random trip to Dubai next year, so I'm not gonna do what I love the most in the world anymore. No, people are still going to inventors are still going to invent, mathematicians are still going to do math and figure out the universe, and scientists are still going to experiment no matter what.
And to
It's
your
not
point,
about that. Yeah.
as organizers, when we think about stuff like that and building a world beyond this empire, and these mindsets that we're forced to adopt, we want to live in a world where that person using the inventor doesn't have to waste their time doing these bullshit jobs that to distract them from doing what they love to do, that's ultimately going to benefit the collective. Like, we should build a world where they ain't got to worry about housing, food, transportation, water, even their education. It's done in a way where it's like, hey, like, I know my basic necessities are collectively cared for because we care for the collective. So I can actually hone in on the things that I know that I love, and things that are my strengths, to be the best for not only myself, but also for the folks around me. You know
Right.
what I
And there have been plenty of very sophisticated simulations run by computers that have shown like no, we can double the Earth's human population and feed everybody if we do certain simple things. Put some solar panels out in every ocean. Certain simple things, man. Like,
mean?
but obviously, and here's well, and I don't study psychology, so I'm not, but the thing is that's also a little tricky about this is the psychopath and the narcissist and those personality types, they're always going to be a 1 to 5% of the population. And
Mhm.
so when one community gets it down and gets it right, and then it starts to move to the second one, then there's a chance that the sabotage will come from somebody that, like the pilgrim, they came with their hand out, but they had a knife behind their back in their other hand,
Mhm.
and they'll take over certain initiatives, or excuse me, they have the potential to take over certain initiatives if that protection that we talked about earlier is not like one of the highest priorities. You know what I'm saying? Which is a double bind because let's say it is an initiative like that where we're providing space, security, and freedom to those that have the genius to elevate the human story to the next level, and we protect them and they are attacked and we have to go ahead and do some offensive protection. Well, now
Mhm.
this whole thing may be reported to the world as a violent regime and a violent thing. It's like, how do you deal with that, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. It's a balance, right? We live in a material world. Things are not ideal. And I don't say that in a this sort of like abstract way. I think the thing is, the reality is that's why we call it revolutionary struggle, right? And we understand that as we build this world, there are people who live in opposition, who live in a way that does not that breeds oppression, that breeds destruction, and we understand that that requires struggle. And yeah, sometimes it's not always physical combat. Sometimes that's an ideological fight, right? Like the battle of ideas, right? Or control of resources and the way in which we use resources, right? But I think we and I think that is one of the things that is kind of a silent killer too for folks who are doing community organizing, because they may understand, okay, we have people who oppose us, we have an idea of where we want to go, but people forget that it's a struggle. People, it's not just gonna happen, right? And there's be no opposition at every level. Like it's gonna be a struggle. Like it's a constant struggle. Even when you are in a place where you're really able to materialize the world that you want to live, it's going to be a struggle, right? Me and you, and the community organizations that we understand and align with us both locally and internationally, we could all be on the same page and we could change the world like how we want to see it. But there's still going to be instances of folks who want to go back to this bullshit. You know what I mean? And that's a struggle, right? Not only a struggle externally, but also internally too. So, like, how do
Yeah.
we engage? To your point, how do we engage these folks in a way that is reflective of the world that we want to live, while also acknowledging the reality that they coming after us? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like not some people first got to see it before they believe it, and then also
Right.
not everybody's going to be on the same page.
No.
Because I tell you, there's plenty of fans of the Confederacy that saw Obama, and I guess they did not get on the same page. Not that I'm
No,
pro.
no, I got you. I got you. I
Yeah,
got you.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's yeah. I mean, there are gonna be folks who are committed to misunderstand. Not even just committed to misunderstand, because I think that's another misnomer too. Everybody that opposes you does not misunderstand you. people are like, I think, and oftentimes we do this thing where we think, we go to something's wrong with these folks. No, sometimes there is something wrong with them, but sometimes, and honestly, more often than not, people are intentional. People are calculating. Like, no, they believe in these oppressive systems. They understand what it does, and they believe in it. And I think that's one of the things we got to reckon with too, because sometimes people are very much so intentional about what they are doing. They
Yeah.
want to maintain things as are. And so we have to also account for that as well. Beyond the people that can be convinced, you have the people that are absolutely certain, clear on what they're dealing with, what they're doing, who their opposition
Right.
is, and they're moving.
And let me add to that, because that definitely ties into the theme of this whole show,
Mm-hmm.
which is expressions of love, right? That
Mm-hmm.
there are some people who think and have been taught. I'll put it like that. There are some people who have been taught, whether they were taught by their environment or they were physically taught via verbal talking, that being on top, and literally being on top meaning they're under your feet, and you're oppressing them, is what love feels like. They were taught
Mm-hmm.
that somewhere, somehow, and they also teach that, right? Some of them succeed in getting to the top with their foot on people's neck, and they teach that to their own offspring. And this is complicated, but it's not reversible. It's not impossible to sort of cure, and it's not irreversible. I think, and feel free to disagree. You and the people in the comments, feel free to disagree. I think there is a godly nature that is all about love within every being, whether you believe that the world is, like the Illuminati is aliens and they're not even from Earth or not. I don't mean just Earthling. I mean every piece of existence, I think, has within it the capacity for unconditional love. But I also do acknowledge the point that you just made, that there are some people who, again, have been taught that the way to feel the best and the way to achieve the ultimate state of being a human being is, or being is to be on top and have your foot over people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very real thing, and I agree. I will say, I agree with the idea that everybody has the potential to build a better world, to build a world that's more affirming.
Unconditional love.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has the potential, and you said it yourself. People are taught
Yeah.
these things, right? Um, I think, and I think this is where the struggle comes in. Is like, it's the level to which people are committed to letting go of what they've been taught,
Ooh.
particularly around these systems of oppression, and how they cling to them for whatever reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what you just said was really dope, because, and I appreciate this theme, because people always associate oppression with hate.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is that people's idea of love oftentimes
It's
is rooted in
misconstrued.
oppression.
Yeah.
Exactly. To your point, you just said that having somebody who grew up and was taught that, I love by stepping on folks, or stepping over folks, or having control over folks. And you just touched on a really under discussed point, because oftentimes when we hear oppression, oh, these people hate. No, there are people who engage in what they call love, and it be oppressive,
Yeah.
right? It's extremely oppressive. And I think this is one of the things why we got to be very clear about what oppression is and is not, right?
Right.
Because
Well, and I'll tell you exactly what oppression is. Oppression, and I'll relate it to what we're talking
okay,
about now. Oppression is the protection of my own power, and the how it connects is you you in your program, in your evolutionary programming, are going to protect what you love, not just from fear of loss, not calculated. It's essential that you provide protection for what you love. And to just being alive, that protection is going to come. And it's subconscious. It's before you think about it. You're going to protect that which you love. And so so oppression in general is the protection of what the oppressors love most, which is my own power or my own influence and my own
and
manipulation.
and I would add to that, at the expense of
Yeah,
others,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
would even generalize to say at the expense of life,
yeah.
right?
Sometimes it spells itself out like that, but I mean,
But I
honestly,
get
bro,
what you're saying. Yeah.
I think if you had a magic wand and
Hmm.
you said to somebody like, well, let's not name any names, but you said to somebody who's directly right, like one of the dead Rothschilds or something, like somebody that's directly in the oppression scheme and
Hmm.
loves that shit and taught that shit
Hmm.
to their offspring. If you said I have a magic wand and I can allow you to keep all of your emotional ties to your power and that emotional rush that you get to your power and the illusion that you have this power, but the only thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make the people that you oppress also feel free, but I'll never let them take your power away. But they're gonna feel free within themselves and they're not gonna. I think a lot of them, not all of them, I think a
Hmm.
lot of them are just protecting the feeling of being powerful. And so they would take the feeling if they didn't have to do the hard work of stepping on people's necks, right? Because one of the biggest things that conquerors do when they rewrite history is they erase the fact of how hard it was for them to get to this place of power, right? There are so many unreported slave rebellions. There are so many just rebellions against oppression that it was either unreported or it just wasn't recorded in terms of it wasn't taught and it faded away in time. But oppression is a fucking job. You know what I'm saying? It's
Hmm.
not easy to be at the top. Because you got your peers that are waiting for you to fall, and then obviously everybody who you stepping on is pushing your foot up.
Hmm.
So no, I think that you give most of them the chance to keep their power and that feeling that they're on top, but they don't have to oppress and they don't have to manipulate. But again, yeah, there are some examples of people who are kind of rotten to the core
Right.
because that has to counterbalance. There are some people in this world who are also pure to the core, and a lot
Hmm.
of people don't believe that that's possible because they just look at human beings like the scum of the universe. But we're not, man. We're just learning.
Right.
We're
Right.
new here. Look at all the other animals and how long, the earth, how old the earth is and how old we are. We're new here, man. We're learning. We are an infant. We are not even an infant. We are a fetus waiting to be
Yep.
born. And so that's that should provide some perspective on why human beings can't really get it together. We're not the scum of the universe, and the fighting is a part of existence. It's not just human
Hmm.
nature. It's you heard it here first. Anybody tell you that war and oppression is human nature? No, it's not. Fighting and conflict is a part of nature itself. It's not
Hmm.
human nature. You're not less than other creatures and other existences, and you're beautiful.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? We put that out there for my audience here, man. Yo,
Yeah.
Denzel came through the show, kicked it off the right way, man.
For sure.
You got any more points that you want to make before we close out here? Or?
I mean, on the topic of love and doing for community and freeing our folks, always ask yourself the question of who taught me what I love, who taught me how to love what I love, and who taught me to despise what I despise, right? And even more fundamental than that, always lead with the question why. Why are things the way that they are? Like, why are we, working a 9 to 5 or whatever we're working to survive? Why are we in these empires that do all these things to other parts of the world? And even inside this country, right? Why is it that we have this rigid relationship to nature, right? In terms of organizing, remember, the oppressive systems that we live in is a collective effort, and liberation is a collective effort. So, find organization locally that's doing their thing to change the conditions. Find find some folks that are doing dope stuff and study. Always study collectively, study, your own and stuff like that, and lean into your gifts and offer those to the collective.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother, for coming through the Expression of Love podcast and expressing some love to the people. Um, it's really dope to hear about, the organizations you're a part of, and some of the things that you've learned over the years, both as your friend and just as another man. Um, I really appreciate you coming by the show, man.
Absolutely, and I'm proud of you, bro, for just the evolution. You know what I mean? Since we've known each other, and to see you in this really beautiful, life affirming place, and creating this space to talk about love and examine love, bro, I'm really proud of you. Really
Thank you,
proud of
sir.
you.